Hey, everybody, thanks for watching Make Me Smart on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button down there so you never miss an episode. Hey, everybody, it's Kai Ryssdal.
And I'm Molly Wood, and you are listening to Make Me Smart, our podcast.
Are you sure? Prove it.
It's our podcast
If
where
that's
everyone
your
is
real
involved.
name. Oh, my God.
You are you, or are you?
Yeah. All right.
It's our show about
yes.
tech, the economy, and culture, and none of us is as smart as all of us, etc.
Okay. Yes, I had to let her get that out. I apologize. Well, I was so eager to get going because here's
so great.
Here's how I'm going to frame this one. I'm going to frame it as a continuation of the conversation we have had over the past couple of years on this podcast about the state and nature of capitalism and whether it's working. And what we're going to talk about today is this idea of inequality and development economics and how that works, because there is so much extreme poverty out there. About 3 billion people living in extreme poverty, which is defined, by the way, as less than $1.25 a day. And so we're gonna have a whole long conversation with somebody really who knows their stuff about that.
Yes, and in fact, I already learned a thing immediately, which is that development economics is a thing.
Yes,
and is in fact a branch of economics about improving conditions in developing countries.
Yep.
But one thing that has been interesting about developing countries and the intractable problem of poverty is that often a lot of money goes into aid, charities, development, all of these causes, and we hope that the money is working, and a lot of times it doesn't, and we don't know why.
Right. So the question is, what works and why does it work and how does it work? And more importantly, which ones don't, right?
Right.
We are talking to a woman today who literally came up with her colleagues, came up with a way to figure that out. Her name is Esther Duflo. She just last month won the Nobel Prize in economics for using randomized controlled trials to do development poverty research in other parts of the world. Mostly, it should be said, in India. She won it with her colleagues Abhijit Banerjee and also Michael Kramer. Banerjee and Esther are at MIT, and Kramer's now at Harvard. Anyway, totally fascinating work.
I should point out here that Esther is both the youngest person to win a Nobel in economics and only the second woman in history to win the Nobel in economics. She co-wrote the book with Abhijit Banerjee, who you just mentioned. It's called Good Economics for Hard Times. Esther, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So tell us, I want to start with the Nobel Prize, as one does, which you recently won along with your colleagues for applying randomized control trials as a way of alleviating world poverty. Can you tell us a little bit about that approach, and had this never been tried before?
So the idea is, if you start from a big question, like, for example, let's eradicate poverty, that's a bit too big a question to really answer in a practical way. So you start by breaking it into smaller questions that can be managed. For example, one effect of poverty is to have access to poor education. So you might be wondering how to make education work better for the poor. Then you can break down the question even more by saying, well, let's look at maybe kids don't learn because the classes are too big, for example. Mm-hmm. And once you have a question like that, you can start testing out approaches and setting up the test very much in the same way that you would test a new drug in medicine. So you set up a trial, a randomized control trial. You take, for example, a sample of schools, and in half of the schools randomly selected, you put in the new approach, for example, cutting the class size in two. And then you compare the test scores at the end of the year between the kids who benefited from the smaller class size and the kids who didn't. And you can do that for schools, you can do that for microcredit, you can do that for ideas you might have to organize election differently. You might do it across a whole range of issues.
Right.
So you're asking whether this has never been applied before. So of course it's kind of almost standard practice in medicine. Mm-hmm. In the social science, it had been applied and a little bit cast aside, not very much used all that much in economics, and not at all in development economics, until Michael Kramer, my colleague who won the Nobel Prize, along with Abhijit Banerjee and myself, sort of unearthed the method and thought maybe we could try and use it.
Can I back you up for a minute and ask you how you approach your research? There's a great article I read about you as I was preparing for this interview, in which you said, in essence, you can't go in looking for the big question. You have to sort of bite off the smaller questions first before you find the thing that really matters.
Yeah, maybe it's a matter of temperament. Maybe some people are more suited to look at like the big questions and apply sort of a more historical approach to look at like what happens over time when country transition to different political system or economic system. But for me, it is hard to make progress on this very big question in a very tangible way. And that's why it makes sense to start by, I wouldn't say these are necessarily small questions as opposed to big questions, but these are well-identified problems that you can attack with well-identified potential solutions, and you can know whether this solution is a promising one or not. So if you think, for example, about democracy, there is an approach that's very interesting that involves looking at revolutions, the French Revolution or the British revolutions, and see how they went, and that's super interesting. And then there is another approach to say, well, once you have democracy, it's made of 1 million rules and different ways to organize it. And those actually have an important impact on how decisions are made and who gets into power and what they do. So my work would more be look at the latter and say, well, suppose that people are better informed when they make political decisions, what's the impact that it has on who gets elected, what their incentives are once in office, and what they do.
You have been quoted a lot talking about finding the right question, and that the right question is a way to sort of synthesize these big topics into something a little bit more manageable and hopefully more effective. But how do you figure out the right question?
So that's a combination of looking at what other questions, what is being left, in a sense, standing on the shoulder of giants, what people have already worked on, what seems to be puzzling, and looking at what people do in the field. So, for example, what governments are interested in, what kind of innovations exist. For example, take microcredit. Microcredit is a huge innovation. It has reached 200 million people. So obviously, what is the impact of microcredit is, an obvious question that I, for a long part of my career, really want to get at. In other cases, so in some cases, it's like obvious, like that it's something that is obviously very important. In some other cases, it comes more out of, you feel that there is a book you would like to read that nobody has written yet, and that's kind of what you set out to do.
Why do you suppose nobody thought of doing things this way in social sciences before you guys did?
Well, I don't know if it's nobody, but maybe the approach remained less present because social scientists are often a little bit obsessed by the big questions or the way you were defining the big questions. And, especially at the beginning when we were starting doing this work, there was a little bit of a suspicion that we were kind of not maybe ambitious enough. That on the one hand, for people who are very much on the left, we are not, this is not how the revolution is going to happen. Trying to figure out if class size should be bigger or not. Somehow it's not ambitious enough. Or on the right, it's like, well, the only thing that matters is the market. So anything else is a distraction. Just let the market be, and things will follow. So anything in between, which is to make the current institution work better and better for the poor, is often seen as like not ambitious enough. Of course, I disagree with that statement. I think it's quite ambitious because what we want to do is to make the lives of the poor better here and now, in if possible in large numbers. And in fact, the policies that we've looked at have touched millions and millions of people now. So the ambition was always to do something like that. Mm-hmm. But I think for social scientists who work in their office and can have the luxury of thinking big thoughts in their mind, then maybe that sounded a little bit too practical.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it sounds like also one of the things, I don't know if this was always your goal, but it seems like one of the effects has been to maybe get rid of this idea of received wisdom, the thing that everyone thinks is true. And that in some cases, your experiments have set out to say, you might all be thinking this, or you might have all agreed on this as an economic principle, but it turns out it doesn't work, which feels very transformative, actually.
Yeah, so I don't think that was always our goal. At least for me, I think it's something that I've learned the hard way, in a way, going at it. So I didn't set out in economics to append received wisdom. I set out in economics to try to help in finding the right policies, evaluating policies, so that the policies that serve the world's poor work better. And if it turns out that this is also usually conforms with received wisdom, then so be it. It turns out that from the very beginning, when we started running randomized control trial, we were surprised by the results. So, for example, the first ever randomized control trial that was run in development was run by Michael Kramer. And he did exactly what I was describing as an example, which is to test, well, they did two together. One is to test the impact of reducing the class size, dividing it in two. He did that with Abhijit Banerjee. The other, he tested the impact of giving textbooks. And in both cases, this seemed, I think, reasonably obvious things to do, that they would work. And therefore, this would be kind of an easy test case for the method itself. And in both cases, they found no impact of doing that. And this was quite striking, because in both cases, it seems so obvious. In Kenya, nobody has a textbooks. You would think it's rather obvious that textbooks have to work. And in fact, they didn't work. And many other inputs of that form, they then subsequently tried with flip charts and trying with reducing the class size, paying teacher better. None of those actually work. And this is very powerful when you realize that your intuitions can be so wrong. And that, I think, very early on gave me a healthy dose of skepticism in anything that I can think. And I try to go in the field putting, obviously, my best foot forward, because you're trying to help people, but knowing that, it is quite likely that your idea is not that great, and you're going to learn it in the field. But that learning is going to be very helpful, because you're progressively going to understand what is the real issue. If you have the humility to realize that most of the time our kind of great ideas are not all that great.
So, not to put too fine a point on it, but your ideas now have been officially certified as great. I mean, the Nobel Committee said so. And so my question is, how does it work in social science? Are people beating a path to your door saying, let us put your philosophy into practice in sub-Saharan Africa or in India or in the state of Mississippi? I mean, what's happening now to you?
So actually, I think that the Nobel Prize didn't recognize any single of our ideas as being so great. Actually, they did, because I think they kind of have to in the statement. But in my opinion, this Nobel Prize is more a Nobel Prize for a movement than a Nobel Prize for the three of us. Because the idea of running randomized control trials, so the idea of never leaving a stone unturned, never think that your idea is that great, always putting it to the test, to the most rigorous test of the evidence, that idea has really caught on. So today, it's not just the 3 of us or 10 of us or 20 of us who do that. It's literally hundreds of researchers. The lab that we run is called the JPAL, the Poverty Action Lab. Mm-hmm. It has 200 affiliates plus 200 sort of fellow travelers. And together, these people have done already 1,000 such individual projects, individual randomized control trials, either complete or ongoing today. So it's already a very big movement, and in a sense, people are already beating on our door asking, can we be part of this movement? And one of the things that we have tried to do is to build the infrastructure that makes it possible for a young person going to this field to run a randomized control trial without doing the mistakes that we made when we started doing them, and having the money and the logistical infrastructure that allows them to do that. So that, to some extent, is already happening. And I think, to be completely honest, I think that's what the Nobel Prize Committee is recognizing, rather than any single of my bright idea. I think if you could remove all of my actual bright idea, then it would still leave something that they would kind of be impressed by. So I think that's the most important thing we have done, is to, we were lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time to nurture that movement, and we did our best. So I think that now what is happening, hopefully, is that already this movement has had quite a bit of echo with policymakers, both in developing countries and now increasingly as well in the US and in Europe. But hopefully what happens with the Nobel Prize, which puts a lot of a public spotlight on the effort, is that even more policymakers become interested and say, oh, can we be part of this? Can we also evaluate what we do? Can we try out new things that we are not sure about, because we know that there is going to be an evaluation? If it's a good idea, we can continue. If it's a bad idea, we can stop it. So to progressively make learning a part of policymaking. And that is something that is already ongoing but could be much bigger. And I hope that it's what's happening now.
Esther Duflo is an MIT economist, recent winner of the Nobel Prize, and co-author of the new book, Good Economics for Hard Times. Esther, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you so much.
I love everything about that and her, obviously. But what I think is so interesting is that what she's describing as a movement and a revolution in economic science is how I guess I thought I always learned that science is supposed to go. Like, isn't that how science is supposed to go? That you ask a bunch of questions, you get a theory or a hypothesis, and then you test it, and you test it against competing hypotheses until you are ready to form a theory. Right. When what it seems like maybe has happened a lot with economics is a whole bunch of people thinking that their ideas are right and then just like not asking themselves or anybody else any questions.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you the general gist. Sure. Yeah. Look, I mean, clearly this is a I thought her answer to my question about, you actually now officially have gold-plated ideas. I think what's been gold-plated is the process, right? This idea of randomized controlled trials and doing social science that way is the thing that the committee was recognizing. And along the way, they had to recognize her ideas and her co-winners' ideas. But really, it's applying this other methodology to these intractable development economics questions, I think.
Right. I mean, we should say here, too, yes, that one of the things that this great New Yorker profile said about her and her colleagues was that they follow that at heart, they believe there is something to be done about poverty.
Yeah.
Which is not something that all economists would agree with. And so then they applied this method. Right. Now, I should say here, too, just as a shameless plug, that there is a big technology and artificial intelligence aspect to this that I'm talking to Esther about for the Marketplace Tech Show. So you could just like double up your podcast listening.
Is it going to run this week? When's that running?
Yes.
All right. Anyway, so send your thoughts.
Scheduling in real time, too.
Yes, absolutely. On the fly. Send us your thoughts. Let us know about what you thought about Esther Duflo, what Molly and I had to say afterwards. Anything you like, any at all. Send it to Send it to makemesmart@marketplace.org. Voice memos obviously are best. And we'll be right back.
And welcome back. Hopefully I timed that right.
Yeah, you did all right.
It is time for the news fix. Please notice my solo link.
Yeah, you've got one. Well, first of all, you've got one in there, so props to you.
Yep. So already a victory.
One. Yes.
I know.
So there you go.
I'm crushing it.
There you go. And as a reward, you get to go first.
All right, I'll go first. I am actually, I'm pretty, this is just a possibly good news kind of story, and interesting because I've spent the last many months of my life and using up all of my patient listeners' time obsessing about whether technology can help us adapt to climate change. Mm-hmm. And turns out that, much like Governor Gavin Newsom said, they may be working on it and we just didn't know. Apparently, there's been this like secretive startup that is backed by Bill Gates and I believe their big energy venture fund called Heliogen. And it just emerged from stealth mode today, Tuesday, as we're recording this on the 19th. And apparently has essentially massively like algorithmically increase the efficiency of solar panels. So they have discovered how to use artificial intelligence and then a field of mirrors to reflect so much sunlight and develop like such hot solar energy that they can use it for manufacturing, for carbon-free manufacturing to make cement, steel, glass, and other industrial processes.
Wow. Well, that's
I
cool.
know.
That's cool.
Concentrated solar energy.
So maybe they can feed it into this next thing that I'm going to talk about. And here's a little synergy, right? I went out and talked to the CEO of Ford this week for their brand new Mustang Mach-E electric vehicle unveiling.
I'm so jealous.
Well, you would probably be more into it than I was because you're more of a car person than I am. But number one, I'm not wild about the car. But number two, what's really interesting is the price point. So it's priced at $43,000, but you get a $7,500 tax credit, which Ford takes pains to point out are no longer available for Tesla customers. Right. So that's
they sold too many.
Right. They sold too many. Right. And those are limited by manufacturer. So the deal is here is Ford, which knows how to make cars and get them to customers, which is arguably not really something that Tesla has excelled at scale. And they're going to do it right at the Model 3 price point, which I think is really interesting. And they're sticking the Mustang pony badge on it. And off we go. I just think it's really fascinating.
I do. I agree. I was like sincerely surprised at this news and kind of excited. I mean, I think it looks sort of cool. I will say as a counterpoint that although Ford does know how to produce cars at scale, they don't know necessarily how to produce electric cars at scale. And when they have tried new technology advances, like when Tesla gets a car out the door, it's a really good car.
Yeah, it's true. That's true.
Which you can't always say about Ford. And I think I think this is going to be really interesting to watch. I think it looks great. You don't like it?
No,
I think it's super cool.
I think the front end is cool. It's very Mustang-y. I think the back end is hatchback SUV generic snooze.
Oh,
truly.
See, I like that. Weirdly. Yeah. I don't know if this makes me just like the mommest mom that ever mommed. But I'm like, I love how...
So Bridget Bodner, the producer who produced the piece for us, called it a mom Mustang. And Bridget's a mom, so she can say that.
Oh, no, it is. And that's why it's totally working on me.
There you go.
I just went from race car to sporty SUV.
Mom Mustang.
Mom Mustang.
Right.
I want the Mom Mustang. I agree with you, though. I think this is fascinating and a pretty exciting development in the EV world. Now, there is always more news, like an exponential amount of news every minute of the day than what we talk about here. Maybe it's smart that we restrict ourselves to just one story. Sign up for the Make Me Smart newsletter, though. It lands in your inbox every Friday morning. It is an attempt to curate the good and most interesting parts of that news, cover some highlights of the week, has some great recommendations from you, the listeners. It is a collection of awesome randomness, the likes of which you will not find anywhere else. Go to marketplace.org/newsletters to sign up.
All right, now it's your turn.
Hi, Kai and Molly.
This is Brent in Detroit.
This is Rebecca from Baltimore.
It was great to hear comments on my question about GDPR.
I wanted to put in my vote.
I want to discuss a slightly different but maybe related thing.
All right, so last week while I was in Atlanta, I think, gymnast Caitlin Ohashi joined Molly and Andy Euler to talk about why she thinks the NCAA ought to drop rules that prohibit college athletes from profiting from their likenesses. Of course, there's been that law out here in California talking about that. Other states are working on it. It's an argument that has a lot of support, but we did hear from a couple of people out there. Sorry. A lot of support, but we did hear from a couple of people out there who think student athletes already have an unfair advantage over some other students. Andy Findley sounded pretty frustrated about it.
The student athletes are already getting paid. Caitlin Ohashi even acknowledged that athletes like herself are receiving a free education, which, considering the ever-increasing problem of student debt, is not a small thing. When we consider that there is a minority of the student population who are able to graduate from college debt-free for no other reason than they can play a game or engage in a sport better than others, while roughly 70% of the rest of the student population are saddled with crushing debt because academic scholarships are underfunded, you'll have to forgive me if I fail to shed any tears for the plight of student athletes.
Well, Andy,
Well,
how do you really
he does
feel?
sound frustrated, although not a bad point.
Not a bad point. Not a bad point.
It does seem like what really happened here is, and we talked about this a little bit, but this is a perverse incentives problem and a problem of inequality. Like you have coaches and universities and television stations and the NCAA profiting to an obscene degree off of the performance of these student athletes. And so it becomes, I think fundamentally becomes a question of fairness.
Yep.
And that's where it gets but you know what? Real good point, Andy.
This RT is an endorsement. Here's an alternative solution from Ronald Gallimore, who it turns out used to teach at UCLA.
I think Molly was onto something when she said, maybe take the colleges out of it. Maybe it's time colleges take a cue from what's happening in high school athletics. Alumni and fans form independent off-campus clubs. These clubs pay licensing fees to colleges for use of team names, facilities, mascots, uniform colors, and fight songs. Fees support non-revenue producing intercollegiate sports. Club teams pay competitive wages to players and coaches using ticket and media sales plus unlimited fan donations and commercial sponsorships. Club players are not required to be students. If they choose to enroll, they are treated as other students with off-campus jobs. If teams wearing Trojan, Buckeye, and Crimson Tide uniforms win championships, will fans care some players are not students? I don't think so.
I believe they will. I believe fans will care.
Believe they may. This is really interesting and complicated, but doesn't feel like it takes the schools out of it in a satisfying way. In fact, if anything, it just confuses the process a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's a start.
I'm not sure it clears things up.
Yeah. I mean, I like solution-oriented thinking, though. So props for that.
Props for that. That's right.
During my news fix last week, I talked about Apple's allegedly sexist credit card algorithm. Listener Alex Meyer wrote in to say that he, too, though, has been the victim of a cold and heartless algorithm. The drama.
Hi, Kai and Molly. This is Alex from Rhode Island. I'm a weekly listener and really enjoy the show. Molly, I appreciated your fixation and your anger about the Apple Card and the non-transparency of their algorithms. Earlier this year, I received a letter from one of my credit card companies stating that they were reducing my credit limit by nearly 50%. This was a shock because I've always been a responsible user of my credit. When I called, they couldn't give me a specific reason except to point to their algorithms. This really angered me, not only because it was such a non-answer, but I was concerned the possible impact this would have on my credit score. Now, I know that credit card agreements have complicated terms that allow limits and other specifics to be changed at the bank's discretion, but given all the reporting that you and others have done on problematic algorithms, I was even more acutely aware and angry about this. So I was wondering if you have specific advice for myself or others if this happens in the future, and mostly just wanted to thank you for helping us listeners to pay attention and be aware of these things.
Over to you, Marketplace Tech host.
I mean, this is... there are so many questions about the algorithm, which, just as a side note, and I am not trying to make light of this, but I do feel like if you need sort of a perfect metaphor for how the algorithm is becoming this sort of like overarching thing that controls us and ranks us and certifies us, and it's just, you can't trust it. It was best emblemized in The Office when Michael Scott drives, because like GPS was really new when the episode where Michael Scott drives his car into the lake because the GPS tells him to. That's where we're all headed with respect to the algorithm.
I like that. I'll go with that. Oh,
yeah.
Man.
Anyway,
Yes.
we are going to do some more reporting on it, I will say, on the Tech Show about bias in algorithms. And some of the neobanking conversations that you and I have had and that we've been having lately do have to do with a lot of the neobanks are trying to rethink the way that credit is assigned because it is such a black box. It is notoriously discriminatory. It is, it based on a bunch of factors that not everyone can control, including lots of errors. and it deserves rethinking. But of course, that'll have upsides and downsides too.
Yeah, of course. Neobanks, of course, are digital-only, mobile-only financial services providers, not like, the bank on the corner. Just because I just learned that phrase like the other day. So not
new ones. It's just a fancy way to say new ones.
Okay, time for the Make Me Smart question. What is something you thought you knew but later found out you were wrong about? And a little tutorial here. If you have never sent us a voice memo but you have a good answer to this question, do us a favor. Pull out your phone, record yourself with the voice memo app, and send the file to makemesmart@marketplace.org. And just because we still get emails about this, we're talking voice memos, not voicemails. You don't actually have to call anybody. You go to the voice memo app on your phone, record it there, and then send it via email. Hook us up.
Hook us up. This week we have a holiday-themed entry because it's never too early.
Oh, my God. Yes, it is. All right, look, it's too early. I object. This podcast is being hosted under protest.
If this answer gets swapped out before you hear it, just know that it would have been about the Nutcracker. Host privilege is about to come into no.
God.
Natalia Holt is the author of a new book called The Queens of Animation, the untold story of the women who transformed the world of Disney and made cinematic history. And this is her answer.
So for this book, I thought I knew that the Nutcracker was this annual holiday tradition that had been going back many, many generations. And what I learned is that actually in the 1930s and in the 1940s, nobody knew about the Nutcracker. It wasn't something that was well known by American audiences at all. And the reason the Nutcracker became this popular Christmas tradition in this country is really because of the women of Disney. It's because one woman, Bianca Majoli, ended up going into a record store in LA and selecting the Nutcracker. She brings it back to Disney, and Walt immediately loves it. He assigns the first female story director to work on the piece. Her name's Sylvia Holland, and she assembles a team of women, and they are almost all women because men at that time did not want to draw fairies for the film. And so as they are working on this film at the studio, by chance, George Balanchine happens to be visiting in 1939, and he sees these images of the Nutcracker and how they are adapting this work to appeal to children, and he is really entranced by it. And so when the film does come out in 1940, it immediately introduces American audiences to the Nutcracker, but it also lights the spark that ends up with George Balanchine's production, which begins in 1954. And of course, today, you can't go anywhere in the United States during December without hearing or seeing some piece of the Nutcracker.
Lovely story. I still say it's too early, but that's,
I mean, I had like my Thanksgiving dinner with my family because they were all in town last weekend.
Yeah.
So I basically, in my mind,
so
it
you're
already
post. You're already there. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
bought a bunch of Hanukkah presents. I'm
go.
about to put my tree up. No, I'm just kidding.
Look, I saw the first Christmas lights on houses in my neighborhood like 2 days ago. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
It's not right.
Yeah.
It's not
Poor Thanksgiving
right.
gets no respect.
Yes.
Thank you for listening. And by the way, in case you have not yet, check out our explainers on your Amazon Echo device. Just tell your smart speaker, and by that I mean Alexa, to make me smart.
and if yours fired up when Molly said that, do let us know, just so we can see how well it went.
I mean, I don't know what we're supposed to do. It's it's a commonly used phrase. And anyway, we post a new explainer every day, and they're just these little like short nuggets of information. It's kind of like the audio version of the newsletter, and I encourage you to check it out.
It's a good analogy. Written by the same woman, in point of fact.
Hey, yeah, there you go.
Anywho, that being the cue.
Woo! Make Me Smart is produced and directed by Sam Anderson. Our digital producer is Tony Wagner. Our senior producer is Jody Becker. Thanks to our video producers, Ben Heathcote and Summer Dunsmore, and to Erica Phillips,
there you go,
who writes both our newsletter and our Alexa skill.
This week's program was engineered by Daniel Ramirez. Our theme music was composed by Ben Tolliday and Daniel Ramirez. The executive director of On Demand is Sitar Neves. The senior vice president and general manager is Deborah Clark.
I'm still reeling from the fact that smaller class sizes don't work.
Yeah. No, I've got a buddy who's an education policy guy, and he's like, yeah, that's the biggest canard. But anyway. Yep.
Then what does? Nothing does.
Yeah. Teachers.
Someone in this room may have a 7th grader with mediocre grades at the moment. Someone here may be looking for answers.
Yeah.
Can we call back Esther?